Under the golden glow of the Bellagio Hotel's hallway sconces, the world was quiet, in a way that made sound feel almost sacred. The hush of late-night luxury blanketed the 28th floor, where the rhythmic hum of a distant elevator was the only thing that moved. But tucked away near the linen closet hidden from most eyes, something else stirred. Not loud, not obvious, but unmistakably human. Isla Reyes sat curled into herself, knees hugged to her chest, her uniform slightly rumpled, as though the weight of the day had dragged her seams loose. The small flip phone pressed to her ear looked almost absurd in the sleek elegance of her surroundings. But it was her lifeline, the last thread keeping her tethered to a home that felt impossibly far away. "I'm trying, Lola. I'm really trying," she whispered, her voice catching in the back of her throat. "But the lawyer said we need to pay by Thursday or they'll start proceedings." On the other end, her grandmother's voice cracked with the weight of helplessness. "What else can we sell, hija? We've sold everything," Isla swallowed. "Ard, not your necklace, that was from Lolo. I'll find a way. Please, just don't give up on Mateo yet. He needs us to hold." Her words trembled, but there was steel beneath them. She wasn't pleading for sympathy. She was fighting to preserve dignity, to buy one more day. Unseen around the corner, a tall man paused in his stride. Julian West had just left a long, mind-numbing video call with investors across 3 continents. The numbers were solid, the projections strong, his board pleased, but none of it mattered in this moment, not in the presence of that voice. A voice filled, not just with pain, but a strange kind of bravery. Raw, real. He knew he should keep walking. She was hotel staff after all. People passed him all the time in starched uniforms and name tags, smiling out of necessity, fading into background like wallpaper. But something about her stilled him. He didn't step closer. He didn't make a sound. He simply stood there, tucked, just beyond the marble archway, watching a girl crumble with more composure than most men showed in boardrooms. When the call ended, Isla didn't cry harder. She didn't fall apart. She stood, pulled her shoulders back, tucked the phone into her pocket, and straightened the cart beside her. Her movements were mechanical, controlled, almost reverent. Then she knocked on the next suite door with a customer service smile that barely masked the exhaustion in her bones. Julian watched her vanish into the room. He remained frozen for a while longer, not because he didn't know what to do, but because he did. And that realization scared him. Later that night, as the lights of Las Vegas pulsed and blurred outside his penthouse suite, Julian poured himself a drink and stared out at the skyline. But his mind wasn't on expansion strategies or quarterly earnings. It was on a girl with hollow eyes and a voice that refused to surrender. He didn't know her name, but he knew he'd seen her, really seen her, and it had been a long, long time since he could say that about anyone. The next morning, Isla Reyes returned to the hallway like nothing had happened. Her steps were tired but focused. She hadn't slept, not truly. She had spent the night calculating tips, overtime hours, and credit card minimums. If she didn't eat for 3 days, if she skipped bus fare and walked 6 miles, maybe she could put together enough to buy 1 more hour from the lawyer. She didn't look toward the end of the hallway. She didn't wonder if anyone had heard her, because there was no room for that, not when the clock was ticking against you. But as she passed the concierge desk, a young man in a pressed vest called her name. "Miss Reyes? Someone left this for you." He handed her an envelope, cream-colored, weighted, her name written in smooth, elegant handwriting that didn't belong to anyone she knew. Isla opened it with cautious fingers. Inside, a single note card, thick as cardstock. "If you want an alternative, come to the cafe. Lumiere, table 9, 7 p.m. J.W. Her breath hitched. J.W. Julian West. Her first instinct was panic. Her second, skepticism. Had she broken a rule? Had he overheard too much? Was this some kind of veiled reprimand? Or worse, pity wrapped in politeness? But then she read the note again. Alternative, not offer, not help, not handout. Alternative. The word felt different, like a door she didn't expect to be near, let alone walk through. She didn't tell anyone, didn't ask for advice. She simply finished her shift, washed the scent of bleach from her hair, changed into her best outfit, a clean navy blouse and faded jeans, and took 2 buses to reach the cafe by 6:55 p.m. For 5 minutes, she stood outside the window watching. Table 9 was in the corner. A man sat there with his back straight, no phone in sight, just a folded newspaper beside a cup of espresso. He looked calm, not waiting, just present. At 7, she walked in. Julian looked up and gave a small, nonchalant nod. "Thank you for coming." "I wasn't sure if I should," she replied, heart hammering behind her ribs. "Neither was I," he said honestly. "But sometimes hesitation is just the space we need to decide who we want to be." She sat down. Not because she trusted him, but because something in her had shifted. She wasn't there to be rescued. But maybe, just maybe, she was ready to be seen. And for the first time, someone might actually be looking. The invitation had felt impossible. Isla had turned it over in her hands countless times, studying the loops of his handwriting as if the ink itself might reveal intent. 7 o'clock at Café Lumière. Julian West. Just a name at the bottom of a cream card, but it might as well have been the weight of the world. She didn't know what to expect, a proposition, a warning, a misunderstanding, but she'd been seen, and when you've lived most of your life invisible, being noticed is as terrifying as it is magnetic. Now, standing outside the cafe's arched windows, Isla could see him waiting. Table 9 in the far corner. He wasn't dressed in the crisp armor of a billionaire. No suit, no tie, just a navy sweater, sleeves slightly pushed up, the glow of amber light catching the sharp edge of his cheekbone. A man waiting not with impatience but with intention. She stepped inside. He looked up the moment she crossed the threshold, and she saw something there she hadn't expected. Not judgment, not pity, but recognition. Not of her name or circumstance, but something more human. Like he had seen a version of her before, in another life, maybe in himself. "Isla Reyes," he said with a soft nod. "Thank you for coming." She didn't sit right away. "I still don't know why I'm here. Because sometimes the world gives us a doorway," he said, "and we're just brave enough to knock." That earned him the smallest lift of eye. Her brow. She sat. The first few minutes were quiet. He didn't rush. He didn't flood the space with rehearsed charm. He asked if she wanted tea. She declined. He ordered her one anyway, a soft blend with cinnamon and rose. She didn't touch it. "I'm not offering charity," he said. "Let's start there." "Then what are you offering?" "A job, temporary, flexible, something outside of what you've known." She folded her arms. "You don't even know me. I know what I saw. A woman with every reason to fall apart who didn't. That's enough for a conversation." His gaze didn't flinch. She found that she didn't want to look away, even if every bone in her body urged her to run. He explained slowly. Julian had inherited thousands of pages of letters, journals, sketches, and private reflections from his late sister Mara, an artist whose work had become posthumously significant. Mara had archived her life with painful precision. He was in the process of building a digital memorial, a project more personal than professional. And he needed help, someone with discipline, with attention to nuance, someone who could see past words and into meaning. "You want me to read your sister's diary?" Isla asked. "Some of it," he said. "And help organize the rest. You'd be living at the estate in Sedona. Private room. No cameras, no expectations. Except to show up and be honest with the work." She stared at him. "Why not hire a professional?" "I tried. They annotated her grief. They labeled her rage. You listened." She shifted. "I'm not some project for your healing." "I'm not asking you to be." For a long time, Isla didn't speak. Her tea cooled untouched. "I have a job," she said at last. "I know. I called the hotel. You work part-time. They'll release you if you accept this." Her eyes narrowed. "You coordinated that?" "I don't do anything halfway," he said gently. "You'd be compensated fairly, weekly in advance. You'll have privacy and health coverage while you're there. And when it's over, then you leave. Or you don't. He wasn't selling anything. He wasn't persuading. He was offering a quiet road away from collapse, not safety, not rescue, just space. "I'm not sure I know how to exist without apologizing," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Then this might be the right place to learn. There it was again, that stillness in him, the kind that didn't demand or impress, just waited, trusted. She nodded once, a decision made not in certainty, but in necessity. He stood to leave and placed a simple card on the table, an address, just outside Sedona. "Tomorrow, if you change your mind, no need to call. If you come, someone will be at the gate." He left without fanfare, without looking back, and Isla sat there, the card trembling slightly in her hand, unsure if she had just been given a chance or a test she'd never meant to pass. The next evening, the desert opened like a hush. Isla stood in front of the wrought iron gate, a small duffel bag in hand. Her clothes were clean but humble. Jeans, a pale blouse, flats half a size too large. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, her face bare. The estate beyond the gate didn't gleam with opulence. It stood, wide and quiet, a colonial-style house surrounded by trees whispering in the warm wind. Ivy curled around the entryway. Lights glowed softly from within. Not bright, but warm. She pressed the intercom. A woman's voice answered, calm and kind. "Miss Reyes, welcome. Please come in. Mr. West is expecting you." The gate clicked open. She stepped inside. Julian didn't greet her at the door. Instead, a woman in her 50s appeared, her gray-streaked hair pulled back, her shirt neatly pressed. "I'm Greta," she said with a smile. "I manage the house. Come, I'll show you where you'll be staying." The hallway smelled faintly, of sandalwood and old books. Isla passed rooms that felt lived in, soft chairs, scattered records, half-drawn curtains. It didn't feel like money. It felt like someone had tried to make memory feel gentle. Her room was upstairs, simple. A small desk by the window, cream bedding, a single vase with a white lily. On the dresser, a note in neat handwriting. "Fresh linens. Knock twice on the kitchen wall if you need anything." She stood for a long time, staring out at the desert beyond the glass, wondering how she had gone from a hotel hallway to this, and what it would cost her to stay. Morning in Sedona arrived without announcement. The light didn't blaze into Isla's room. It slipped in, soft and slow, as if the sun knew this place required gentleness. For a long time, she stayed in bed, listening to the stillness, half forgetting the familiar symphony of slamming doors, crying infants, and tired engines she'd grown used to. Here silence was an invitation, not a warning. Downstairs, Greta had left 2 mugs of coffee on the counter and a small handwritten schedule. There was no pressure, no command, just suggestions. Breakfast at 7:30, work with Noah at 9, box. 12 of Mara's letters to be sorted and catalogued, a reminder to rest. Isla stared at the word rest as if it were written in a foreign language. By 9, she stepped into a large, sunlit room with ceilings tall enough to breathe in. The floor was covered in stacks of boxes and piles of leather-bound journals, sketchbooks, and envelopes. On the far side, a man in a worn linen shirt and thick-rimmed glasses was sorting through a stack of papers with methodical grace. "Noah," he introduced himself with a nod. "Julian said you notice things. We need that." The first thing Isla noticed was the way the room smelled. Not dusty, but nostalgic. Ink and old paper and lavender, as if memory had a scent and this house had bottled it. She sat beside him and he handed her a set of letters. "These are from Mara's Berlin years. She wrote a lot then, most of it in layers." "Layers?" Isla asked. She'd write something on the front, something else in the margins, and then sometimes something unsaid in the tone. Isla began with a letter written in red ink. It was filled with sharp language, but behind the anger was something else. Longing. The next was gentler, written in pencil so faint it was almost apologetic. Then another, smeared with watercolor stains, as if Mara had written it while painting. They worked in silence, interrupted only by the soft flick of pages turning. Each envelope, each scrawled note became a breadcrumb. Mara's voice emerged not as a ghost, but as a presence, vivid, aching, intelligent. She wasn't trying to be understood. She was recording the parts of herself too fragile to say aloud. She wasn't hiding, Isla murmured. She was archiving pain. Noah looked up, surprised. That's exactly how Julian once described her, but he couldn't finish the thought. The letters unfolded like a confession, raw and uncurated. Some were written to herself, some to strangers. Some, Isla suspected, to Julian. But none were meant for display. They were emotional fingerprints, left behind in the hope that someone might one day see them not as proof of damage, but of survival. Later that afternoon, Julian passed by the open door. He didn't enter. He didn't speak. He watched as Isla traced her finger along the edge of a torn envelope, her brow furrowed in focus. Something about the way she handled the letters, without fear, without judgment, held him still for a moment. Isla glanced up. She called you brilliant and unreachable, she said, lifting a page. Julian stepped inside. She had a gift for saying too much in too few words. She also said you build walls out of logic and wait for someone patient enough to knock. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. She was rarely wrong. Noah cleared. His throat excused himself gently and left the two alone. Julian walked over to a box labeled Unsorted, Private. He pulled out a folder and handed it to Isla. This one's yours now. It's messy, unfiltered. If you want to stop, you can. She took it with both hands. Why me? Because you don't flinch, he said. Most people stare at grief, like it's contagious. You don't look away. He left her with the folder and a quiet space in which to read. That evening, Isla didn't sleep right away. The letters clung to her, Mara's longing, her defiance, her hunger to be seen. Isla sat at the small desk in her room, flipping through the pages again, absorbing their emotional cadence like a language she already knew. When sleep finally took her, it was the deep kind, the kind earned after a day not of labor, but of connection. The next morning, Isla wandered the property after breakfast. She followed a path that led her behind the house to a forgotten corner. Overgrown shrubs bordered what once might have been a garden. A broken trellis stood at an angle, and a rusted bench was half swallowed by weeds. She pulled out her notebook and began to sketch. The outlines were faint at first. Circles, arrows, notes in the margins. She imagined herbs growing wild, flowers planted in the shape of Mara's signature. A place where memory could bloom without demanding attention. Noah found her there an hour later. He looked at the page, then the space, then back at Isla. That was Mara's favorite spot, he said softly. She called it her quiet. Would you help me restore it, Isla asked. He didn't hesitate. Yes. Later, over tea, Isla brought the idea to Julian. He listened, not interrupting, not deflecting. She had plans for it, he said, but never finished. Then let's finish it for her, Isla said. Not as a monument, as a space for healing. He nodded once. You'll lead it. That night, when Isla returned to her room, she found a small envelope tucked beneath her pillow. Inside was a page torn from one of Mara's sketchbooks. On it, a single sentence scrawled in red pencil. Build something that outlasts the ache. Isla folded it carefully and placed it inside her own notebook. She didn't know what this place would become, or who she'd be when it ended. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't tracing someone else's story. She was beginning her own. The garden began not with a blueprint, but with silence. It started with Isla standing in the corner of the estate's western lot, where the land was overgrown and uninviting. Ivy choked the old stone borders. Thistle crept through the cracked flagstone paths. The earth was stubborn, hardened by neglect and heat. But to Isla, it felt sacred. This was the space Mara had sketched a dozen times, hinted at in her letters, as her quiet. A place she wanted to grow things that no one would expect to survive. Isla took a breath and began to clear it. Not because someone asked her to, because something inside her needed to. She didn't ask Julian for permission. By the time he found her kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds with blistered hands, she had already claimed the space. "You're not afraid to start with ruin," he said quietly. She looked up. "It's all I've ever had to work with." They stood in silence, the kind that only exists between two people who know the cost of rebuilding. Then Julian did something she hadn't expected. He rolled up his sleeves, knelt beside her, and began clearing the stones without another word. That evening, under the porch light, Isla unrolled her sketch. Noah and Greta sat beside her, sipping tea as she explained the plan. The garden would be more than a tribute. It would be a sanctuary, not manicured, not perfect, but intentional. A space to sit, to write, to grow, to forgive. "I want to call the still place," she said. "Because healing doesn't shout, it waits." Greta touched her hand. "She would have loved that." Julian nodded. "Let's build it." They worked every morning. Noah brought in cedar benches and built a mosaic table from shattered ceramic tiles found in the cellar. Greta transplanted sage and rosemary from her own garden. Isla painted a faded wall with a quote from one of Mara's journals. "Everything we bury is still part of us." And Julian, true to form, handled what others didn't see. Permits, irrigation, sourcing soil from a regenerative farm 50 miles away. But even as they built something new, Isla felt another idea stirring inside her. It began as a whisper, a question she scribbled in her notebook late at night. What if this space didn't just restore Mara's memory, but gave others a beginning? What if the unused wing of the estate, with its sunlit windows and dusty hardwood floors, could become a place for people who, like her, were trying to rebuild with nothing but the bones of survival? She brought the idea to Julian one evening. After the garden had taken shape, they sat near the fountain, the scent of mint and fresh soil surrounding them. "I want to turn the west wing into a community space," she said, voice quiet but certain. "A studio, a gathering room, maybe a place to teach skills, sewing, writing, even basic budgeting, for women who don't get invited to start over." Julian studied her for a moment. "And you want to run it?" "I want to build it. The way we built this garden, with people who know what it means to be told they don't matter." He didn't ask for a pitch or a business plan. He simply nodded. "It's yours." The next morning, Isla opened the heavy double doors to the abandoned. Dingy, sunlight spilled over the dust like memory rediscovering itself. The space smelled like old books and possibility. She swept for hours, moved furniture with Noah's help, and began clearing shelves. Julian reached out to local organizations discreetly, inviting quiet partnerships. Greta reached out to friends who'd once been social workers, teachers, caregivers. Slowly, the wing came alive. The first woman to arrive was Beth, a retired nurse who had lost her husband 2 winters prior and had barely spoken since. She didn't ask for anything, just sat by the window and mended a torn sleeve with quiet purpose. Then came Jana, a young mother who brought her toddler and a bag of scraps, asking if she could learn to hem. Mira followed, a teenager who never spoke but painted watercolors on napkins and gave them away like secrets. There were no intake forms, no demands, just space, open doors, a long table with mismatched chairs, and Isla, who sat with them, not above them. With her hands in thread, her voice calm, her presence steady, she introduced a new activity each Thursday, letters to my younger self. They wrote with pen and paper, sometimes in silence, sometimes through tears. One week, Beth stood and read, hers. Her voice wavered at first, then grew stronger. "I wish I'd told you that you weren't weak for grieving slow," she said. "That starting over isn't shameful. That hope isn't naive. It's brave." Julian was at the back of the room that night. He hadn't planned to stay, but he did. His arms were folded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes never left Isla. After everyone left, she found him near the garden, hands in his pockets, the sky above them velvet with stars. "You make space for people," he said. She tilted her head. "I just remind them the door is already open." He looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't allowed himself to want. "You're different when you lead," she smiled faintly. "Different how?" "Like you forget to be." Afraid, she didn't reply, because it was true. This building, this creating, was the first time in years that fear hadn't been the thing shaping her. And when she walked back inside that night, the west wing glowed with soft light. On the wall near the entrance, someone, probably, Noah, had hung a wooden sign carved from driftwood, the still place. Below it, "Where beginnings don't ask for permission." Isla stood there for a long time, listening to the hush of it all. No applause, no fanfare. Just the quiet, certain rhythm of something lasting beginning to take root. And for the first time, she didn't wonder if she belonged. She simply stayed. The invitation arrived folded inside a pale blue envelope edged with silver. Leela nearly dismissed it as a misdelivery, someone else's honor mistakenly placed in her hands. But her name was there, centered and certain. The Sedona Community Honors Night. She stared at it for a long time, her thumb pressing gently against the raised lettering, half expecting it to disappear. She hadn't asked for recognition. In fact, she had done everything she could to stay unseen for most of her life. Being acknowledged felt less like praise and more like exposure, and exposure had never been safe. When Julian found her in the kitchen that evening, staring at the envelope beside a half-empty cup of tea, he didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her until she met his eyes. "You should go," he said softly. "It's not my world," she answered, her voice low. He leaned against the counter, arms folded but his posture open. "It wasn't mine either, until I stopped, pretending I needed permission to be in it." Isla didn't respond, but she didn't throw the invitation away either. That was enough for him. The night of the gala came with the scent of rain hanging thick in the air. The venue was an old winery at the edge of town, all soft lights and exposed brick, where people spoke in careful tones and laughter curled around champagne glasses like perfume. Isla arrived alone, dressed in a navy gown she had sewn herself from donated fabric, every stitch a quiet defiance. Her shoes were borrowed, her earrings simple studs Greta had gifted her that morning. Julian was already there, arriving separately as promised. He looked effortless in charcoal gray, but his attention never strayed far. When their eyes met across the room, he gave her the kind of smile that didn't ask anything of her, just offered steadiness. The evening moved forward in its polished rhythm, speeches, applause, a string quartet tucked in the corner. People drifted past Isla with smiles and polite nods, many of them knowing her name now, some through whispered stories, others through the echoes of what the still place had already become. And then, the screen lit up. A montage of honorees cycled through, educators, veterans, artists. Applause followed each one. Then came Isla's slide, but it wasn't a photo from the garden or the workshop. It wasn't her helping Mira thread a sewing machine or reading Beth's letter aloud. It was an image from 3 years ago. Her in a courthouse parking lot, standing in her hotel uniform beside a public defender. Her stepfather behind her, shouting. The caption read, "Former suspect in pharmaceutical theft case, cleared due to lack of evidence." The room shifted. Not with chaos, but with something quieter. An intake of breath, the tension of curiosity turning into speculation. Isla's heart thundered. The blood drained from her face. She stood perfectly still, not from poise, but paralysis. She'd spent years trying to outrun that moment. And now here it was, projected 10 feet tall on a wall of applause. Before. She could move before she could shrink. Julian rose. He didn't rush, he didn't storm the stage. He simply walked to the front and took the microphone from the startled host with a quiet authority that stilled the room. "You've seen a photo," he said, voice low but unmistakably clear. "Now let me tell you about the person in it." The audience turned. "This is Isla Reyes," he continued. You know her from the still place. Some of you know her as the woman who brought your mother out of silence, your sister back to the sewing machine, your daughter to her first real opportunity to be heard. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the rows of uncertain faces. She didn't come here to be applauded. She came here because no one else thought she belonged, and instead of proving them wrong, she chose to prove herself right. Julian turned slightly, his voice gentler. Now, she's not here because she was perfect. She's here because she kept showing up, when she had nothing, when she was doubted. When the world didn't care whether she survived or not, she did anyway. A beat passed. And if you think a mistake, real or accused, can erase the worth of someone who builds what she's built, then you haven't really been paying attention. He handed the microphone back and walked straight to Isla, hand extended, not to rescue, to join. For a moment no one clapped. Then a single burst of applause broke through, then another, and then it spread, not loud but steady. Isla took his hand and stepped forward, not because she needed affirmation, but because she'd earned her place there. Outside, after the ceremony, the sky was dark and quiet. The air smelled like damp earth and juniper. Isla and Julian stood under the awning of the old winery as guests began to trickle out. "You weren't supposed to explain yourself tonight," she said, the wind brushing loose strands of hair from her face. "You were being honored." "I wasn't explaining myself," he replied. "I was explaining you." Her jaw clenched lightly. "I hate that it still follows me." "I don't," he said. "It means you never stopped caring who you became." She looked up at him then, something raw and clear in her eyes. "Would you have stood up for me if it had been true?" His answer came without pause. "Yes." "Why?" "Because what we live through matters," he said. "But what we choose after, that's what defines us." She let the words settle. They didn't fix anything, but they didn't have to. They simply held. As they walked back to the car in silence, Isla realized something strange. She wasn't afraid of the story anymore. Not the picture, not the whispering, not the old headlines. She had been seen at her lowest. And someone had stayed, not to fix her, but to stand beside her while she rose. The desert woke slowly the morning of the opening. There was a stillness to it that felt almost ceremonial, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The sky turned from indigo to coral, and light spilled over the newly painted sign that hung above the front gate. The West Garden Project, a place for new beginnings. It had taken 6 months of steady work, of navigating red tape and skepticism and exhaustion, but the community center was real now, carved from the bones of an abandoned post office and transformed into something with breath and purpose. Inside, Ela moved through the rooms with a clipboard in one hand and quiet determination in her step. The sewing studio gleamed. The upstairs reading room smelled of fresh wood and paper, and the walls of the children's corner were covered in watercolor paintings from the early volunteers. Every corner held intention. Every color had been chosen to soothe. Nothing in the building shouted. Everything welcomed. Julian watched her from across the room. He stood near the front doors, leaning lightly against the frame, his hands in his pockets. His suit was simple, clean, the kind worn not to impress but to mark something meaningful. He didn't interrupt her rhythm. He had learned not to. Isla, when she was building, existed in a world slightly ahead of everyone else's. His role was to stay steady, to be where she would land when she finally stopped moving. The guests began to arrive slowly, some from local shelters, others from the neighborhood, and a few from the distant, more polished corners of Sedona, who had once dismissed the project as wishful thinking. Beth was there, standing proudly by the community kitchen, handing out banana muffins she had baked that morning. Mira sat quietly in the window nook, sketching. Even Greta had made the trip, wearing a navy dress and soft sandals, her face full of pride as she guided newcomers through the hallways she'd once dusted as though they were sacred. At noon, the ceremony began. A makeshift stage had been set up in the garden. The folding chairs were mismatched, the sound system slightly fuzzy, but no one seemed to mind. One by one, people spoke. Beth, tearful and steady, told the crowd how the still place had reminded her that she wasn't finished. Julian spoke about systems and the illusion of permanence, about how true architecture began with vulnerability, not steel. Even Eleanor West, Julian's mother, took the microphone. Her words were short, but they were sincere. Then it was Isla's turn. She stepped up to the podium, her palms slightly damp, her heart steady but loud. She looked out at the crowd, not just faces but stories. People who had come with fear and stayed because something inside them had been met with welcome instead of walls. "I used to think surviving was enough," she began. "That if I could just keep moving, keep cleaning, keep disappearing into the background, I'd be okay. But surviving and living are not the same thing." She paused, finding Julian in the crowd. His gaze didn't waver. "This place isn't about fixing people," she continued. "It's about reminding them they were never broken in the first place. That belonging isn't a privilege, it's a right. That safe doesn't have to mean silent." There was no applause at first, just stillness. Then, slowly, hands began to come together. Not because of performance, but because of truth. It was the kind of applause that grows out of recognition, not obligation. As she stepped down from the stage, Julian met her halfway. "There's one more thing," he said, gently taking the microphone from the MC. His voice, always calm, had a gravity to it now. "I used to think success meant control," he said, "that if I built enough, earned enough, insulated myself from grief enough, I'd never lose anything again." He turned to face Isla fully. "Now. But then I met someone who reminded me that safety isn't found in walls. It's found in people, in choosing, in staying." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, opened it with care. The ring inside was simple, white gold, no unnecessary adornment. But Isla recognized the design immediately. It was hers. A sketch she had once drawn in the margin of a notebook, never meant for anyone else to see. Her breath caught, her throat closed. "I found the sketch," he said softly. "I asked a friend to make it. I knew I wanted to give you something that was already yours." There was no drama in his proposal, no theatrics, only certainty. "Isla Reyes," he said. "You didn't save me, but you made me want to stay. You made me believe in staying. Will you marry me?" The entire crowd was silent, breathless, and Isla, standing in front of the man who had seen her when she was still stitching herself back together, said the only word that ever mattered. "Yes." The applause this time was thunderous, but neither of them heard it fully. Julian slipped the ring on her finger, and she held his face in her hands, steady, sure. They didn't kiss until the crowd quieted. When they did, it was soft, reverent, like closing a circle instead of starting a parade. That night, after the celebration dimmed and the lights of the center were turned off, Isla and Julian sat barefoot, on the front steps, their shoes beside them, their fingers laced together. Mateo was asleep in the room above, safe and warm, his laughter still echoing faintly in the back of her mind. "You did it," Julian said. "No," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "We did." He kissed the top of her head, then leaned back, looking up at the stars. "I used to think I was building a life people would admire," he said. "Now I just want to build a life worth coming home to." Isla closed her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "You already have." They sat like that, long after the wind died down and the last of the guests had gone. Two people who had been broken by different things. Two people who chose again and again not to run, and in that choosing they had built not just a place, but a future. One that didn't require perfection, only presence. And the promise to stay. In the quiet echoes of the West Garden Project, Isla and Julian's story reminds us that survival is not the same as living, and that sometimes the most radical thing we can do is stay. Not stay where it's safe, but where we choose to build. This is a story about transformation that begins not in triumph, but in stillness. It's about people who've been told they don't belong, finding the courage not just to dream again, but to root those dreams into soil. One letter, one garden, one act of steady love at a time. We learn that dignity doesn't come from status, but from how we treat others when they have nothing to offer but honesty. That healing is rarely loud, and progress rarely perfect. But when we choose each other, again and again, we begin to reclaim what the world tried to take. Let this story be a quiet fire in your chest, a reminder that you too are allowed to begin again, that you are not defined by your pain, but by what you build beyond it. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that hope is never foolish, subscribe to Fortune's Wrath. Your support is the reason we keep creating stories that matter. Let's build something beautiful, together,